Welcome to the David Institute Premium Masterclass titled Reflections of Daniel in Joseph's Shadow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I said we only know that the Israelites were bond people in Egypt, but nobody ever told us that the Egyptians were in bondage in their own land. We're seeing that today when Joseph bought the people and their lands so that they could have seeds. We're never really told this.
But it's strange that you say that because at this time when the Egyptians were in bondage in their own land, we didn't read the Israelites that were in bondage.
That's what I'm saying.
The Israelites at the time when the Egyptians were in bondage, though the Israelites were in Egypt, they were never really in bondage.
They were in the best part of
the land.
Egypt, Goshen.
Exactly. And there was famine. But only God to tell you how strange the whole thing is. It did not look as though
they
were experiencing what the Egyptians were experiencing, because Joseph must have really taken care of his people so well, because I don't think they experienced this level. But well, they don't. Remember, the Goshen was given to them, so they did not need to give Goshen back to Pharaoh to eat, because they were already living beyond grace. That's quite an insight. That in those times, as a child of God, if you depend on the Lord and listen to His direction, because the thing about it is that when you look at how David wrote about it, he said, and the Lord knew about the famine that is to come, and He sent one of them ahead of time, even Joseph, to go to the land of Egypt to prepare a safety for them. So we also need to begin to ask ourselves, in times of crisis, who has God sent on our behalf? Or how is God, your trials and your temptations, could it also be a solution to somebody's dark times, somebody's famine period? Because in as much as this was a global famine, there comes a time in the life of individuals when they are in famine, and at such times, God would have sent you ahead of time to rescue such families or to rescue such people. So sometimes it's good also for us as children of God, because when you look at that, I think it was Psalm 105 or 105 or 107, where David was talking about and Joseph was tried. And when you look at the story now, in retrospect, you just say to yourself, so somehow God prepares a way out of every trial. Every trial, God prepares a way out. Why I say that is, if not for Joseph passing through the trial and passing the trial, he passed through it and he passed it. If Joseph had failed, maybe slept with Potiphar's wife and didn't need to go to jail, he wouldn't need to have come across the Pharaoh to interpret the dreams. He would have failed. There would have been no rescue plan, or God would have made an alternative rescue plan. Also the same thing as when you look back and you say to yourself, oh, it was wrong for Abraham to have slept with his house girl. And for heaven's sake, if Abraham did not sleep with the house help, the house girl, to be frank with you, it would have been another alternative means that would have been used to get Joseph to Egypt. Because it was his uncle, the Ishmaelites, that bought him and sold him to the Egyptians. So imagine if Ishmael was not born through the failure of Abraham. There wouldn't have been any opportunity for the Ishmaelites to buy him from his brothers and sell him to the Egyptians that aided Joseph's transition to Egypt. So sometimes every bad thing turns out to be good in God's plan. We should always be looking at the bad aspect of it. Whenever I read that psalm and how God also removed the weight off the shoulder of Joseph, because at the level of intelligence God gave him, it's mind-boggling. I mean, I can't imagine him. He must have walked through all the steps. This is what, if we have such a problem today now, we feed it into the computer to advise us, or we feed it into the system, or you call a committee. But this is a case of a single man thinking for a whole nation, and the king trusted in that thought process. I look at that and I try to look at what happened to Daniel.
Exactly.
And when I look at Daniel, it's very, very interesting because he was also in the same scenario. But the disturbing thing about Daniel was that the Bible recorded that Daniel was the most trusted and the most intelligent. And he also had visions and interpretation of dreams and all. But you can't explain what Daniel did, especially when you realize that 90% of what was happening in Babylon was these hooligans trying to just advise the king wrongly how to be a big man, how to be luxurious, how to intimidate and oppress your people by putting on beautiful structures and letting them bow to idols, scrappy things that does not really help in aiding the growth of any nation. But the only place you can understand that Daniel really spoke to the king and advised the king, it took him 1 hour to process how to speak to the king. A whole 1 hour. When the king told him the dream, he knew the interpretation, but he needed to find the correct language. And he started telling the king that, look, let this interpretation be to your enemies. You hear what I'm saying? But the fact was that it is the king. And he advised the king, please trust in the Lord, honor the King of Kings, and you will live. After 1 year, the king failed, and he went down the beast route. What that gives us insight is, was the first time of us knowing the counsel of Daniel. We don't really know the counsel of the skies. We have no understanding of how it works. But it's good to know how it works. It's good to know. And I'm glad that we do know how it works. Because when you now look at the nitty-gritty of the tactical planning that went into safeguarding the land of Egypt through the mind of Joseph, you know that the wisdom of Joseph is from the throne of grace. I believe when Daniel saw the gift of interpretation of dreams, I remember he must have studied Joseph in the land of Israel while on
the land of Egypt.
The land of Israel.
Okay.
He must have studied about Daniel must have studied about Joseph when he was young in Israel before he moved over.
Okay.
So if that be the case, what he studied about Joseph was one of a few things about how to talk, how to reason, how to think, how to trust God, how to live for righteousness. These are very fundamental points. And I know by God's grace is a lesson for us also.
Thanks for watching David Institute Premium Masterclass.